Mr. Birdie, members of the board, we do have 3 items for board discussion this evening. Our first item is a book study, and we are scheduled to discuss pages 1 through 40 this evening, kind of a short, only 40 pages this evening. The Power of Positive Leadership by John Forden. And if you remember our prompts that we've used in the past, I read, I noticed, I wondered.
I'd be happy to lead us out here. The book starts, interestingly enough, with the author talking about the fact that he's not naturally a positive person. It would be easy for someone to pick up a book and think, oh, well, this is a positive person, all he sees the glass half full, easy for he or she to write a book about that. But this is a person who struggled with negativity and even affected their marriage, his marriage. And so it's self-taught. It's a self-taught behavior to him, and this book, I think, helps you understand that it's a behavior that is learned. It can be learned, not innate. From there, I just wanted to mention, being a football fan, there was a great story in here about Mike Smith, who coached the Atlanta Falcons for a number of years, and in relationship with the author, shared his culture and how that culture was built on fundamentals, positivity. It bred success, and then when they failed to win the Super Bowl, they lost sight of that culture and couldn't recapture it. And I think one of the things I took from that story is no matter what kind of a foundation you lay, and a foundation is important to lay, you have to continue to work at it. You have to continue to drive that whole message, continue to foster the foundation and the positivity and what you have going in your company's culture, your school's culture, whatever it may be. And I thought that was very interesting. A couple other points, but I'm sure
Please go ahead.
happy to let someone else talk.
Oh, I can chime in. I heard you mention the sports portion, and I don't know how you overlooked the Clemson and Tide. I don't
There you go.
understand that. Of course, that first year that Clemson went out and, of course, lost against the Tide.
Lost to Alabama.
Roll Tide. But they did have success, what was it, in 2016? And he did talk about just that whole idea that he wouldn't give up. He kept refining his game until they were eventually successful somehow. But that trend didn't last, but that's okay.
Still a good lesson, right?
I have to mention that. I'm a huge Tide fan, Alabama girl. Anyway, I do not have my book with me. However, I thought it was a very good book. One of the things that stood out, I'm not sure which page it was, but culture drives expectations and beliefs. So within this idea that your behavior drives your habits, I like the fact, or I noticed that they talked about how to create, the culture that you want. And it was this idea that you can't delegate it, that it starts with the leader at the top. They set the tone. It's just having a positive outlook is important. Within all of that, there's always a lot of planning that's underneath. He mentioned specifically Ford, Alan Mulally, who is famous. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Mulally went to Ford after he'd had a tenure in the aerospace industry. So within the aerospace industry, there was a lot of upheaval, and the tendency to not always have such a positive outlook is something that's there with the aerospace industry. However, Mulally was an effective leader, and so when he went to Ford, and bringing that spirit of positivity and bringing that spirit of we're going to make a can-do culture, still underneath that, there was a ton of planning that had to take place. There were a ton of layoffs that actually took place as well, because Ford had to restructure. And in one part of the book, he talks about removing, persons or personnel that don't necessarily fit with the culture. That in order to create the culture that you want, you can't always have, everyone within. Everyone is not going to always fit in the culture. And so the hard work that it took to create the success that was forward, there was a lot of underlying layers to it as well. But I did think that was pretty good, pretty effective, and I just wanted to point that out. I like the success stories that he mentions, Apple, of course, the sports analogies and what's happened with those teams, but also Southwest. Southwest had a great comeback story, because they were not always seen as the top dog in the field. But that positive leadership and just making those small changes actually led to their success. So I thought it's a good book so far. It's a good read. I think there's a lot of lessons that can be taken from it. Yep.
Someone else want to chime in?
I particularly liked how he used the term energy vampire. I had a friend who used to say, if somebody was really negative all the time, he'd say, well, she's a black hole of positive thought. Like, that's just where positive thoughts go to die. But I like energy vampire better, because there are always people that you run into, and when you're done talking to them, you're like, wow, I feel like the life has been sucked out of me. So I thought that was like a really good analogy that he used with that. And I did also like how he said he's not, a naturally positive person. He's learned to adapt and change and grow. I was taken in with this book right at the beginning, because he talked about how his father was a police officer, but I didn't have that same experience. My dad's a generally positive person, and, while there were times over the years where things had happened in the community that I could tell weighed on him, to talk to him on a day-to-day basis, you wouldn't get the kind of negativity that he had experienced with his dad. But I like that I marked one passage that he wrote, while the pessimists are complaining about the future, the energy vampires are sabotaging it, the realists are talking about it, and the optimists are working hard with others to create it. And I thought that was that's on page 11. I thought that was a very telling passage of how different people react to different things. And overall, I'm really pleased with this book. I actually went well into chapter 5 before I realized that I was so interested in it, and I'm interested in learning more about it.
Mr. Clark?
Well, I also think it's a great book. Anytime you can add sports and, true stories into the analogy, it's helpful, because that's what they lived. The first sentence actually, he says, I have to work hard to be positive, and people do, especially in today's world. You have to. And if you deal with the public, it's hard, and if you're public dealing with people, it's tough. On page 9, where it says, being positive is not just full of unicorns and rainbows. It says something like that, and that's true. You think of positivity, and everything's got to be puppies and rainbows and butterflies, and it's not always, not always like that. Being positive has to be real and true. You can sense when somebody's a fake person, and if you're going to be a leader, that's obvious. I've always been told, and I tell my kids this, there's a difference between being happy and joyful. You can be happy, but joyful is different than being happy. And being a true leader and being positive, your staff can know when it's real, when it's not real, and especially if they see you outside that environment and you're not that positive when you're living life. And I think a true positive person exudes that through everything they say, do, and think. So I really like the book. I'm excited to get through the rest of the chapters.
Well, thank you. The first thing I noticed was on the heading for chapter 1 on page 1, being positive doesn't make you better, it makes everyone around you better. Like, I'm like, well, this is going to be a great book. I mean, right there in front of you, it talks about, it's not just about you, it's about creating a great environment for everybody. And so I've had that experience in my life, and I love to be around positive people because they do make everybody else positive. Even if it's a sad room, a positive person can change that around. So it isn't just about you, it's about people around you. I took that from that.
Excellent.
Anybody else want to jump in, something else?
Sure. Page 34, it talks about the telescope and the microscope. And the telescope helps you and your team keep your eyes on the vision. The microscope helps you zoom focus on the things that you must do in the short term to realize the vision. He went on to talk about it as a simple exercise that can immediately be put into practice, so very applicable, right, with your team, asking them for one microscope point and then one telescope point to address it. That was really good.
I'm interested in, as we get further into the book, what you do to change a culture in a place. You know, I've worked in plenty of places where the culture is just so ingrained into the system. It's been like that for years, and you're like, how do I make this better? Maybe there's a lot of gossip or negativity or whatever. So I'm interested in digging further into this and seeing, what kind of changes can be made and how to do it.
Sometimes we say culture can eat policy for lunch, because the culture can take it over. And sometimes it's like turning a big ship in a small pond, too. You may not have time to do it, but you got to take time to do it.
Anybody else want to chime in with anything? I also noticed page 10, talked about a Duke research, shows that optimistic people work harder, get paid more, and are elected to office more often, and win at sports more regularly. And I think that is because if you just focus on the negative, you're never going to inspire yourself to be good, to be better, and to inspire people around you. And so, if you're always negative and you don't see the opportunities in front of you because you're so focused on all the bad things that have happened. So that's what I took out of that message. It's like you can be better if you just be positive. You'll make more money, you'll get elected to more offices, and it will get people to work harder. Shorter, you want to, anything else to add?
No, I thought the questions that were there for starting were building the culture, what do we stand for, and what do we want to be known for? I think those are very important. I think that's a guiding principle for any culture, any school district. What do you want to be known for? What do you stand for? I see that sort of playing out a lot more in the country in general. And I think for this district, we have a standard. And through the test, through times that have challenged us, I think we've kept that standard, which is important. And so just building a culture with those two questions are key. What do you stand for, and what do you want to be known for?
So when somebody says Fairfield Schools, what do they immediately think of, right? That's what you want.
That's exactly.
You want it to be a positive.
I want it to be a positive thing. I wanted to immediately jump to those persons' minds that, we do stand for preparation for life and excellence and.
Yeah, good point.
Yep. So.
On page 12, the end of chapter 2, that framework, that should be a poster. Positive leaders drive positive cultures. It gives the example of a lot of positive and how it applies to leaders.
Also, like on page 26, where he says, you must keep building your culture. Mike Smith learned that a culture will not sustain itself. You must sustain it. You must continue to build it, reinforce it, live it, protect it, and fight for it. Because if you don't keep nurturing it, it could easily turn into a negative. That's what I took from that. If you want to keep it positive, you keep working at it. Just like anything in really in life, marriages, businesses, schools, you don't keep working at it. If you don't keep making it better, it's going to go bad. And so that's why I said, when I read that, must keep building your culture. That made me think of that. Anybody else? Mr. Smith, Ms. Lane, other members?
Sure. So there's one part on page 33 about sharing your vision, and a North Star is important because everyone needs one, and everyone needs something to hope for and work toward. So as I was reading through this, I'm thinking about this software conversion that's coming up in a couple of months for us. And I'm thinking to myself, okay,
Stay positive.
stay positive and try to make sure my team stays positive and moving forward, because there's several that may be stuck right where they're at and happy where they're at, but we need to move forward because it's going to be a lot better, faster, more efficient. So I kept thinking about that as I was reading along, like, okay, I need to remember that
Right.
in a couple months.
All right. Yeah, so I love the first 40 pages, and I had a hard time picking 3 things today. I went through my own little process to pick 3, and so I'll share them quickly. Page 9, about 4 lines down. It's difficult to change the world. As a leader, you will face all kinds of challenges, adversity, negativity, and tests. There will be times when it seems as if everything in the world is conspiring against you. And I think we all have those days. And I've often said to people like, hey, when you're trying to change the world, that might feel a little overwhelming. But we've been talking recently about going for small wins. Go for small wins. You don't have to shoot for the moon every single time. Go for the small wins, and you may have heard me also say, can we just wrap our community up in a bubble and make some changes here and make a difference here every day, and then eventually we'll have this tremendous impact on our community, and then that can spread to change the world. But you can't change the world in one day, and you shouldn't try to, because you could get overwhelmed. So that really resonated with me. The other one was on page 22. I loved this piece under Positively Contagious. When you have a feeling in your heart, it goes to every cell in the body, then outward. And people up to 10 feet away can sense the feelings transmitted by your heart. This means each day you are broadcasting to your team how you feel. And I just think that is so important for leaders. Talked about to others before, like, hey, let people feel your passion. They need to feel that from you. If you are leading, they need to know what your heart is. Where your heart, your love, your drive for our kids in this school district, let it shine so other people can see that and feel it. And so I love that part about people up to 10 feet away can sense the feelings transmitted by your heart. So that really resonated with me. And I did have on page 37 the part about Clemson. And here's why I love it so much, and it's very timely based on some conversations we had with the principal today. It says, here, he and his team, talking about Dabo Swinney, had just lost the national championship. Dabo was already inspiring his team with a vision for the future. In that moment, he taught me that positive leaders, despite the circumstances, obstacles, and setbacks, keep the vision alive and continue to share it to inspire others. Things do not always go the way that we want them to go. And we heard a presentation tonight about all of the things, and that's why that presentation was so great, because the board and the community haven't had an opportunity to hear some specific examples. One would be the high school team. They noticed a trend in the data that showed that kids weren't doing well as time passed on over a long assessment. I mean, you don't just discover that when you are glancing over things. You are getting into the weeds. And why do they do that? Because they want our kids to do better. And they're trying to work hard to figure out some strategies. Hey, what can we do to help our kids do better? And but guess what? Today we were meeting with another principal, and it was an outstanding presentation. And there were data binders, and these binders had individual student names with little check marks. If they were falling short in a standard, individual students, check marks all over the place. This student's doing well in A, B, C, and D. This student we need to do work with this child on C, D, and F. Again, why are they doing it? Because they want our kids to do better. They're here to serve. But the administrator made a comment to us today. We're just working so hard. Oh my gosh, if we don't get the results we want, I'm going to be devastated. But the reality is it doesn't always work out the way that you want it to. And so leaders have to be there to pick up the pieces and to say, hey, we didn't get the results we wanted, but what matters is, what do we do with the results? How do we respond to them? As long as and again, you put in the work, you put in the passion, the heart, eventually you are going to see some, positive outcomes. But it doesn't always happen every time you go through that process. And so it's just, people need to be lifted up. Because if things don't go the way they want, and then they feel like they're being criticized, that's where the leadership comes in and say, hey, you worked hard. We will continue to work together to try different things. Again, it's all about how you respond. So I knew you'd like the Alabama piece, but it was timely too. That's one of the reasons I picked this one, because we've been having great conversations, and today one said, oh gosh, I just hope this, what if it doesn't work? But you don't know until you try. You got to keep trying and keep plugging away. So, thank you.
Anybody else?
I do have one thought. Mr. Gordon was just sharing how important culture is in our schools and everywhere that we are. Matter of fact, one of his quotes that stuck out to me was, culture isn't just one thing, it's everything. How do people feel when they walk into our schools? This morning I was at school. I ran out to the car. It was cold outside. I walked in my office. My secretary was sitting at her desk, and she said, ooh, I feel the cold from you, which, outside the cold just emanates from you. And it just made me think, what do people feel from us? What do people feel when they walk into our schools, when they walk into our board of education meetings, when students walk into our classroom? How do we make them feel? I know it's not all about feelings, but if you don't get them hooked by the feeling, what they feel as a part of your culture, then it's hard to do the rest of what we need to do in education. Culture is so vitally important.
Anybody else? Well, I look forward to finishing the book. And hopefully come February, everyone will be excited for the next, is it 100 pages or close to 100
It's
pages?
a little longer. It's a little longer.
Chapter's
got real long.
90 pages?
Winter breaks in there. Big people have some time
I did
over the
notice that staff gets longer to read those pages than the board,
I saw that too.
because you do it at the administration meetings, but just wanted to point that out.
Thankful for that.
The board's expected to read it a lot quicker, so. No, great choice, Mr. Smith. I'm really enjoying this book, so thank you so much for pointing that out. Okay, we'll move on to the next item for board discussion, which is the school calendar. Mr. Martin?
Thank you, Mr. Burning. I'm pleased to present to you this evening a draft of the 2022-2023 school calendar. This calendar has already been looked at by our district office team, by our administrative team, by union leadership, asking each of those groups for input. And now we bring it to you for discussion tonight, and we hope to vote on it at the next board meeting later in the month. Just an overview, this calendar is very similar to our current school calendar. We start about the same time, the same day of the week. We end at about the same time, the same day of the week. The first day for teachers is August 12th. The first day for students is August 16th. Then we go through our typical holidays, Labor Days, and in-services. We have 4 quarters. They're all equal in the number of days. Each quarter has 44 student days. We have 4 in-services. We still have our fall break in October. It's the 14th through the 17th. Our Thanksgiving break is the same. It's 3 days, Wednesday through Friday. Our winter break is 2 full weeks. The first day off is the 19th, and we return on Monday the 2nd. Spring break is always the week, whatever week has the first day of April in it, so it's a little earlier this year than usual, but it's the last week of March. And then we get into May, and we have the last day for seniors on the 22nd, the last day for students on the 25th, the last day for teachers on Friday the 26th, and graduation is at the Cintas Center on May 27th. We're out before Memorial Day, and we do not go into June, so that's good points. That's the highlights of the calendar. Do you have any questions or thoughts about it?
Questions or comments from Mr. Martin?
I have a statement. I was at South last week giving out dictionaries, and I think Mr. Smith also got this statement or question. I had some little people ask if we could preload snow days. Is that possible?
Well, you would have to ask the superintendent about that.
I told him I'd take it back to the board. It looks
I
good.
guess it depends if we get that sponsorship from Chick-fil-A. Snow days,
Need to get on that.
inside story, that's right.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? It's unusual that we're so late with the calendar. Usually because it used to be we were 3 years out, but I know
Right.
because of Cintas, and
Right,
they have a different policy for handing out graduation dates.
right.
Um,
That was our holdup. We
Right.
finally got the date. Actually, once we get the date,
The
we
rest
had the
of it falls into
calendar
place.
created that day.
Yeah.
And we started going through the process. So, yes, it is a little later. Although last year, I think we approved it at the final October meeting.
Right.
So we're a little later.
And this past year, graduation was Memorial Day weekend, obviously. And I had a friend of mine comment, well, that's the weekend I go on my big golf weekend with my buddies, and now my kid graduates. I'm like, you're going to have to set some priorities as a parent.
Right,
So, I'm not going to tell you whether he went to graduation or not.
right.
Any other comments? All right, thank you, Mr. Martin.
You're welcome.
Okay, the next item is the 2022 President Pro Tem. And so typically, it's the standard procedure that we've done going into our organizational meeting in January of each year is the sitting president from the previous calendar year has acted as the President Pro Tem. And of course, the President Pro Tem, we all know, just really starts the meeting, gets the process started until a new president is nominated and voted on. And then the new president takes over the organizational meeting. Of course, in 2022, we're going to have a new president, and I won't be present at the organizational meeting as a board member. And so typically, the vice president steps in for the president when they cannot be at a meeting and they run the meeting. And so I just wanted to get your thoughts on, should we just have Mr. Bagley as the current vice president step in as the president pro tem? Because we do need to name one tonight. It is an on-board action item. Is that where the direction, it just, he'll just be running the meeting as the president pro tem.
I mean, I think that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so later on, I just didn't want to appoint it, have that appointed based on, based on what my recommendation is. So, so later, action item number 2, we will add Brian Bagley into that line.
Okay.
Okay? Great.